Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Healthy Heart Nation heart to heart conversation on the Black Superwoman. 30-year-old Chelsea Chris was found dead in New York on January 30th. It is suspected that she jumped to her death on that fatal day. Chesley was the former Miss USA in 2019, and by most accounts, everyone who knew her said she always had it together, always smiling, always a joy to be around. A woman who had everything going for her. So, why this horrible outcome? So, our discussion today is going to be around, does society put unrealistic expectations on the Black woman? So, thank you for joining us. And as we go into our conversation, we are joined by two very special guests. Christina Sanford is here to be a part of our discussion today. She is a Healthy Heart ambassador, and so I'm going to allow her to introduce herself at this time.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be a part of tonight's conversation. I am a sort of veteran psychotherapist. I serve women, professional women specifically, who are struggling with personal issues, emotional issues, mental health concerns that impact not just their family and their relationships, but also their work. I speak at different places, educational institutions, companies, businesses, and national conferences on issues related to mental health and wellness. And I'm just here to contribute to the conversation today. Thank you, Danette, for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Ricardo White, can you introduce yourself at this time?
Hello, everyone. Sincerest condolences to the Chris family. And yes, I'm a section chief of psychiatry at one of the here in San Bernardino. I'm also the proud founder of the Mastermind Institute, where we believe if you master your mind, you're going to master your life. I am also founder of the Black Therapy Initiative, where it's my goal to put positive messages to uplift you as you go on in your struggle called this life. And of course, Danette is a very valued and treasured friend, she and her spouse. And so we are honored to participate in any kind of discussion that will provide any helpful insights and strategies that may help those who are struggling in this area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So I think it is very important as we have this discussion around the Black woman that it involves both perspectives of male and females. So I do want to make sure that we take a note of that. That's very important because we can't solve these problems and we can't handle it on our own. And we need our community in order for us to be successful in this endeavor. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is the Black Superwoman syndrome. What is that? And Dr. Cheryl L. Woods Giscombe is a professor at the University of North Carolina, and she is credited with putting together these requirements in terms of what the Black Superwoman syndrome is. And there are 5 major behaviors demonstrated by Black women leaders. One of them is the obligation to manifest strength, obligation to suppress emotions, resistance to being vulnerable or dependent, determination to succeed despite significantly limited resources, and an obligation to help others. If you look at this list, right, on face value, you say, hey, what's wrong with these things? But that's why you guys are here. You're the professionals. So if you guys could just kind of elaborate on how these 5 things over time really wear on a woman's psyche.
Maybe we could go one by one.
Okay.
And Queen, if you'd like to start with the first one.
Sure.
Obligation to manifest strength.
Thank you, Dr. White. So that first one is so telling with the language that the doctor who coined this term Black Superwoman syndrome, she uses the term obligation. That is the key there in identifying where there is a challenge, where it doesn't serve the Black woman's well-being. Whenever we are in a place or a space where we're obligated to do anything, where we feel obligated to do something, there's always an internal conflict that goes on there.
Right.
And when we're talking about manifesting strength, the reality of our human existence is that we are vulnerable, is that we are fallible, is that we are frail in some ways. And so with the Black Superwoman syndrome, our obligation to manifest strength at any cost is what places an undue pressure on us as we're moving through our daily lives, our relationships, our work, to present something that really isn't authentic.
Right.
And so that, again, the obligation piece is huge. That is where the issue lies. And it does not resonate with our true sense of humanity.
Absolutely. And Dr. White, with regards to, being vulnerable and determination to succeed.
Oh, I mean, I was going to take a stab at obligation to manifest strength as
Absolutely.
well. First of all, the list doesn't make me feel good. If anything, there's this emotional tear just kind of streaking down my face, because it's like, how burdensome, and what a crushing weight to be under. So this obligation to manifest strength, it's really interesting how it's when you're weak that you're actually strong. It's when you have the courage to say, I need help. That's actually the first sign of strength. And so often it is when people are projecting this image of strength that they're often the most vulnerable. So imagine actually forcing a person to radiate this image, when those of us who, if we've tasted any measure of power, that it's really when you're weak that you're actually strong. It's when you can walk into a room and comfortably say, guys, speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old. What's going on? It's not assuming that I know everything, especially when I don't. So very interesting.
Yeah. And so would you guys essentially say that we're putting this on ourselves, or is this how society views us? Do we as Black women have the opportunity to say, I don't understand, and it not be used against us, especially in a professional setting?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think it's fair to say that dominant culture has really struggled to acknowledge its blind spots as it relates to race. If you asked the typical person, hey, where are we? We heard pretty questionable statements like, after the election of Barack Obama, we are post-racial.
Right.
Society's post-racial. This was a marked, sentiment. You had those kinds of thoughts, and then you saw the subsequent, 4 years after his departure, and it didn't give us a lot of evidence that it's post-racial. And my point being, I think society has really struggled to acknowledge this is a blind spot.
Right.
It's a real challenge for us to acknowledge this is a blind spot. And the significance of that is, if we don't even acknowledge that it's a blind spot, then we then become at risk of putting these kinds of pressures on people without even realizing it. After all, it's a blind spot.
Right.
So you don't make it safe for that person to say to you, you know what, I'm really struggling in this area per se. There's dangerous corporate language like fit. What on earth does fit mean? I'm not sure that you're a fit.
Right. Yeah.
It's really interesting language.
Yeah. And Christina, what do you think?
Yeah, I want to drill down a little bit more beyond what Dr. White is saying and go to the historical context here. Yes, presently we have blind spots, but there's a reason why there are blind spots right now in our society when it comes to the Black woman.
Mhm.
Historically, the needs of others were fulfilled through the Black woman. When we're looking at the transatlantic slave trade, when we're looking at the rural South in colonial times, all of those historical experiences of the Black woman and the perception of the Black woman and the
Right.
treatment of the Black woman.
Mhm.
She was invisible. She was there to meet everyone else's needs, nurse the children, clean the house, wash the clothes,
Right.
till the land, make sure the soil is good and right, and
Mhm.
make sure that, you know, everything on the plantation is taken care of. And you better not say not one word about your pain,
Right.
because your pain does not exist. And so when we're looking at it presently, in terms of the blind spot that Dr. White was talking about, previously in historical times,
Yeah.
that was intentional.
Right.
That was deliberate, the deliberate erasure of the humanity of the Black woman. That was deliberate. And so as we move forward in time, as things change and the dominant culture is not talking about their desire to subvert the Black woman's power, her autonomy, her ability to make choices for herself.
Right.
As they begin to silence their own sort of politically incorrect ideals, then it becomes a blind spot, because more recent generations are not privy to that ideology from history. And so it becomes a blind spot because today's dominant culture says things like, I don't even understand why they're acting like, why do you think you need to carry the world on your shoulders? That doesn't make sense. No one told you to. Just let it go.
Right.
And it's because they're not educated about their history in the context of truth.
Yeah, and I was looking at like the fourth one, which is the determination to succeed despite limited resources, right? The alternate of that is to fail, right? Because we may not necessarily get the same support, but we need to be successful for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of our families and things of that nature. I mean, in terms of overcoming this one, how do you go around it? If you ask for resources, I guess that would be the answer, maybe.
Well, it's interesting because in this one, our success has been our own undoing. We have been required to achieve feats of innovation. Second to none.
Right.
We made chitlin a delicacy. The feats of innovation that we as a people have achieved in taking nothing and making it a delicacy. The very word that is the worst slur in the dictionary, you have seen comedians build careers on. Our capacity to take nothing,
right,
and make it world class. It's just absolutely amazing. And we've been required to do that. So it becomes our own undoing, so that it leaves us in a situation where now, despite we've not been given a lot of resources, it's very easy to look on oneself and feel like, well, there must be something wrong with me because I'm not succeeding, you know? And the reality is, you have a right as a human to receive the resources that are necessary, that any other human would need to achieve this feat. You have a right to that. And unfortunately, there's no one telling you that.
Right.
There's no one telling you that, unfortunately. So that's incredibly tragic.
And so the answer is to ask for it, ask for more resources.
But before you do that, I would encourage the exercise looking into a mirror and rehearsing to yourself with power and conviction, I have value. I have value. And hypnotizing yourself into that belief and that understanding, I have value. And as you infuse confidence and belief in yourself, you can then go to who you may need to and speak with the quiet power of understanding. Look, I'm here to deliver value to you, and these are the resources that will be
I need.
required.
Absolutely.
That will be required.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christina, it looks like you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I think it is important that we tell ourselves that we have value, or to verbalize that to ourselves, but that's not where our inherent sense of value is going to come from. Speaking it helps, but I think when we begin to do things that are outside of what we're normally accustomed to doing that speak to our value, that's what helps us to be able to see, okay, when I ask for resources, when I say I can't do this project without us hiring 2 or 3 other people on the team, I can't deliver this alone. It's in us recognizing and communicating our limitations.
Right.
Because the issue with the Black Superwoman syndrome is that we are operating as though we have no limitations.
Right.
Hence, superwoman. We are superhuman. But when we come back down into the truth of who we are, into our own humanity, and we say, yes, I'm in corporate America. Yes, a lot is expected of me as a Black woman. And the reality is I must overperform in order to be seen as adequate, merely adequate.
Yes.
Those things can all be true. And it can also be true that if I'm given assignments or asked to do things, that I'm being asked to do them because I'm perceived as superhuman, then that's where the sense of sort of the idea needs to be shifted. That narrative of super needs to be shifted to natural. I am a woman. I'm a natural person. I am human. And so we ask for those things despite what's happening around us.
Well, I know, like for me, when we were growing up, right, our parents would tell us, you know, constantly, you have to be better than everyone else, right? Like that was just, you know, drilled into us. You have to be 2 times better. You have to be 3 times better. And then on the other side, you know, we also kind of grew up in the era where, you know, it was believed, oh, you're here just because you're Black, right? So then that, like, even if you've earned it and you've gotten to that place, you know, now you're like, okay, well, you're just, you know, you're just here because you're Black, or, you know, affirmative action or things of that nature. When in essence, you know, majority of the time, if not all the time, we've had to work and prove ourselves more than anyone else, right? If you look at the statistics, Black women are overeducated, right? We have more degrees, we have more, you know, masters and doctorates or whatever. And then we're still, from a salary standpoint, you know, getting paid similar to what maybe a white man might receive after coming out of, you know, high school and working a few years, like in terms of the comparable pay. You know, and so like you guys are saying, basically, essentially, the way that society still views us has not changed, even though we've gone out and gotten the things that we were told would level the playing field. Do you all have things that you want to add to that?
I would say has not changed sufficiently.
Okay.
Has not changed sufficiently. And I think this is where at times we can lose the dominant culture, where they're like, there's no question things have changed.
Yes.
Yeah, no, things have changed, but not sufficiently. And it's not going to be sufficient when there is not a collective acknowledgement of the wrong.
Okay.
You know, it's an interesting statement when one says, I wasn't part of it or responsible for it. And you're also not part of acknowledging it. You're also not part of apologizing for it or issuing an apology. You know, it's interesting. I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and there's an article in which apparently the families that suffered a recent atrocity, you know, of some sort. I guess it was a mass shooting. I guess the Air Force is responsible for giving them upwards of like $200+ million because it was seen that they were somehow negligent in notifying maybe the FBI of some information. So I don't want to be, reckless with the details.
Mm-hmm.
The details don't as much matter as much as it's interesting that fault was laid at the feet of someone.
Right.
Because of this mass shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my question. What was done for Tulsa?
Mm-hmm.
What was done for this entire town that was incinerated along with its inhabitants? Mm-hmm. Nothing was done. Nothing was done for Rosewood. Nothing was done for Black towns that are at the bottom of lakes today. Nothing was done. Mm-hmm. It's like no mass act, and we see atrocity after atrocity where blame is made and reparation is issued. But in our situation, you see over and over again, very often these historic things that took place, there's nothing really done, and I just think that that's tragic. And we all know that if a wound is not acknowledged, mm-hmm. if the wound is not cleaned, it continues to fester. And in this situation, it's not just Blacks that are hurt by this. It's
right.
not just Blacks.
Society as a whole. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's how it gets hurt. Like
mm-hmm.
if you do not condition yourself to be just, it doesn't just isolate to your interaction with, let's say, the Black issue. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing is you're inculcating a process in which you're going to be warped and limited in rendering justice. Mm-hmm. Period. And that's the reason why you want to fix your justice system, because at some point you're going to be the benefactor of that unjust system at some point.
Christina, did you want to add something to that?
I just want to go back to the Black Superwoman syndrome and mm-hmm. go into some of the points here regarding suppressing emotions,
right?
Feeling an obligation to help others. Those are some really key pieces that we need to address as Black women because of our history and not just our extensive history, but our more immediate history, our families of origin, right. The way that we are reared in mm-hmm. our family systems has a lot to do with why we have a tendency to suppress or repress our emotions in a way that allows everyone else to feel okay, yet we're feeling miserable.
Right. And we think that's normal.
We think that's normal. Oh, don't say anything. Oh, I know it was wrong, but just smile. It's fine.
Right.
It's fine.
Right.
And this is an issue that goes across the gender in terms mm-hmm. of women and girls in general. I was mm-hmm. reared to be not necessarily demure, but pleasant, inviting, mm-hmm. and agreeable.
Right.
And when I didn't agree, it was deemed as something that was unladylike or somehow don't not agree, always agree, just agree.
Right.
And so
make it easier for everyone else.
Absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. That was our job, to ensure that everyone else is comfortable. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, when we look at some of the statistics about heart health in women mm-hmm. and how Black women, I don't know exactly what the statistic is, but I believe that we are number one. Heart disease is the number one killer in Black women. That's not just because somehow magically Black women have pervasive cardiac problems. It's because of stress. And there's stress that's brought on by this suppression of emotion, by the obligation to manifest strength, by our resistance to be vulnerable or dependent. These factors all impact our mental health in ways, and our physical health in ways that are still being studied. And I know that there are studies out there that talk about this, but I wanted to bring that to the forefront today mm-hmm. as we're talking about emotions and mental health. We talked about Chesley Chris and how mm-hmm. she jumped from the 29th story and completed suicide. And there were things that she was doing and being, I'm sure, in her personal life that may not have been authentic because of these factors that we're identifying here. Needing to be
Absolutely.
pleasant and beautiful and smart and all
Hmm.
of these things, but no one is asking us, well, how do you feel?
Yes.
Well, what do you need?
Hmm.
Well, what isn't making you happy? What
Well,
is it in your life that needs to be changed?
well, you can, Queen. You're not. Are you finished speaking, Queen?
I am.
You. What these things tend to have in common, especially this obligation to suppress your emotions, is a denial of your humanity.
Hmm.
These things are denying your ability to be human. I'm not prepared to comment on Miss Kristen. I don't know the
Hmm.
details of her story.
Right.
Uh, but when I take a look at the obligation to suppress emotions, um, I am inherently denying your right to be human,
Right.
and that's absolutely devastating. I I'm I'm I have to bring to mind um, what's her name, Isabel Wilkerson's cast, The Origins of Our Discontent, and she did such a wonderful job of explaining the reason for ongoing racism. And in her book, I mean, it's a definite, must read. But
Hmm.
one of the things I walked away from it is the caste system, and there being, someone at the societal top and someone at the societal bottom. I could see what is a subconscious desire for the caste system, because if I'm not at the bottom, then there is an incentive to preserve its existence. As long as I don't have to be at the bottom, that means there's something that will prop me up. And
Hmm.
so, but that's critical in terms of what you house that person in who's at the bottom, like some of the things that we're talking about. That's the problem with, not seeing that we're all human.
Right.
Is the person is asked, look, man, you need to suppress your emotions. Now, from a mental health standpoint, we know how unhealthy it is to suppress. we
Right.
we know how unhealthy it is, and how critical it is actually to find healthy forms of expressing what you're feeling, and it being a critical thing that women have
Hmm.
venues that allow them to express and to be vulnerable, and to not suppress their emotions, and to be felt and heard and valued and validated.
And so the last point is the obligation to help others, right? Like there's a part of you that gets something from helping others, but again, it's the word obligation, correct?
Absolutely. And there's, you know, when we look at our obligation to help others, there's a twofold piece there,
Okay.
actually threefold. The first one is exploring our intentions for helping. When we're clear and connected to ourselves, and we can ask ourselves, well, why am I doing? If I choose
Mhm.
to do this, why am I doing it?
Right.
What is it that I'm seeking to accomplish? What's my intention here? But
Mhm.
the other two pieces are when we feel obligated to help others. Um, Sometimes we do it because of our poor self-worth.
Mhm.
We do it because by helping others who are in need, somehow that gives us a sense of value that we
Mhm.
don't have any other way, or we don't
Right.
believe we can accomplish in any other way. And so we do that in order to bolster our uh, sense of worth, our
Right.
feeling, and to really help ourselves to feel better.
Mhm.
Um, and then finally, when we're obligated to help others, sometimes we do it because that is what we feel is expected of us
Right.
instead of what we want to
What they
do.
want to do. Right.
Mhm. And so that goes back to some of our family of origin stuff. It
Mhm.
also goes back to our generational pattern, um, in the historical context. Speaking of the Black Superwoman syndrome, that it doesn't matter what you feel.
Right.
They need help and you need to do it. There's
And
another
you
piece.
sacrifice. You
And you
sacrifice
sacrifice.
yourself. Right.
Yes. But the
It's a
other
sacrifice.
piece, there is a final piece there, and I was trying to remember what I was going to say there. But yes, the Black Superwoman syndrome, because we are an oppressed people, especially in America, by virtue of our oppression and our oppressive history, our being a victim of oppression, we naturally have a sense of compassion, and a sense of an empathic sort of bent toward people who are in need, because we know what it feels like to be in need.
Okay.
And so there's a connection that we have between our experience historically and someone else's experience, even if they don't have the same racial or cultural history as we do. If they're the underdog, then we somehow intrinsically connect with them and we feel a sense of empathy. And there is a dynamic there that's going on.
Right. So like you want to invite everybody to the party because at that one time you got left out of the invitation, right?
Yes, exactly.
You don't want anybody to have to feel the way you felt in those moments.
Well said. Well said, Christina. And if we just drive it down even further, you're talking about it's okay to do nice things, but what's the motive?
Right.
What's the motive? Is the motive a healthy one? And what we're talking about is if you don't feel you're inherently valued, and if you feel like your value will be derived from this, so now you feel obligated. Like, what exactly is the need that you're fulfilling? And this is really interesting because when it's time to fulfill needs, we are at risk for fulfilling the need with the real thing, or we can fill it with a counterfeit.
Okay.
The danger of filling it with a counterfeit, or this dynamic where I'm using this to validate myself when I'm supposed to have inherent validation, is you struggle to set boundaries. You struggle to set boundaries, attach consequences, and enforce them if violated. And it all can stem back from not having a sense that you have value or the legitimate ability to enforce those boundary violations. And here's why this discussion of boundaries is so important. When you talk about a vault, if you look up the definition of a vault is a space within which valuables are kept.
Okay.
And when something is valuable, it has to be bounded. The space around it has to be protected. And so that's the critical reason why when you're going to do something that's important, or when you are someone that is important, you have to have those boundaries around you. And that comes from a sense of self-worth in terms of understanding I'm valuable.
And so you're not worthy because you're helping someone. You're worthy. Yes. Period. Like,
period.
I'm worth it. So I'm not just worth it because you like me because I'm giving you something. I am worth it
already.
Because I am, right?
And now I can with comfort say no.
Right. Because you're not trying to prove anything to anybody. And I
can deal with the discomfort
right.
from your little twinge or whatever. It doesn't take away from my value. And oh my goodness, relationships get really rich when you can say no. And it doesn't take anything away. Girl, I know that. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on. It's cool. I'll hit you up another time. You know, you have something real at that point, So this issue of boundaries and not accepting counterfeits is critical.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that we want to just kind of go over. And so we'll go and go into that now. And so quick questions, and I would like for both of you guys to answer these for us, please. How does being strong weigh on our mental health? And Christina, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think we have discussed this today earlier in our conversation. There's nothing wrong with being strong. I think it's the meaning that we attach to the word strong that really impacts how we show up in the world for ourselves and for others. If strong to us means that we are impermeable,
Mm.
In, you know, we cannot be, we're infallible. We are, you know, unshakable and all of those things, then that's how we're going to respond in our
Mhm.
relationships. And that's how we're going to show up in the world, which again, when we do those things, presenting ourselves as infallible and never uncertain and never vulnerable, then we're of course suppressing our emotions because that's impossible for us to be human and never feel those things. If
Right.
that is the meaning we attach to the word strong, then we're in
Mhm.
trouble.
Okay.
How does it weigh on our mental health? It creates situations where we are developing depressive symptoms,
Mhm.
anxiety, because when we're not in control or when we're not presenting this picture of what we want other people to see, then our
Mhm.
anxiety levels go up. And if we don't have the coping skills to deal with that, there are things that we're going to do that are unhealthy, that hurt ourselves and hurt
Mhm.
others, whether
Okay.
that's substance use, um, codependent behaviors with other people. As Dr. White so eloquently stated, a failure to establish and maintain healthy boundaries with others. Those are all ways that our perception of our strength can impact our mental health. We have to get straight and get clear first about what strength actually means.
Absolutely. And Dr. White, for you, and the slide kind of got obstructed a little bit, but why is being vulnerable viewed as weakness?
Well, it goes back to what Christina just shared in terms
Mhm.
of a lot of warped understandings that we have of
Right.
strength. You
Right.
know, we think strength is yelling and domineering and taking up a lot of space,
Mhm.
and so often it's kind of the reverse of that. Strength, at the end of the day, comes from clarity.
Right.
Clarity. Strength is often demonstrated in the face of humility and self-assuredness that I don't have anything to prove. So being vulnerable becomes it's such of a mark of a person who's comfortable in their skin. You
Right.
know, hey, does this match? Or you walk in, hey guys, get me up to speed. I have no idea what's going on right now.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and you demonstrate your worth when you add value because you
Mhm.
got oriented, correctly, but you were comfortable acknowledging I'm disoriented right now. So help me get oriented.
Right.
That's vulnerability.
Yes.
And my goal is not to ignore the unfair position that a person is placed in as so much bias is showered upon them
Mm.
so that they literally feel unsafe to acknowledge what any other human would be able to, but they've been forced into this inhuman space of perfection. and
Right.
and, and there's so much, there's so much punishment, there's so little tolerance. At the end of the day, the question is, do you really fit?
Yeah.
These are some very interesting terms.
Right.
So I can't fault that person for not wanting to be vulnerable in a space that's clearly declared itself as unsafe for vulnerability.
Absolutely. And I think that is a very critical point, right? Because you can't be vulnerable in every situation. But I think the challenge is that as a Black woman, if you feel like you can never be vulnerable in any situation, then that's where we're doing ourselves the greatest disservice.
Absolutely.
Well, it becomes a situation where don't stop building your support.
Mm.
Don't wait for don't wait for equality to build your support system, whether it's
Mhm.
mental health support, whether it's mentoring, whether it's family. Take it seriously. The need to build what will sustain you
Right.
through your war zone. It is a war zone. It is a war zone.
Yeah. So, Christina, for you, and just maybe you can speak to this personally, like, why can't we ask for help?
Oh, it's a lot of different reasons. I could go many different places with that question.
Mhm.
Um, I'll take it back to our personal experience.
Okay.
Um, when we don't have our needs met, in our families of origin, in our family system.
Mhm.
I just want to be clear with everyone that everyone across the human race
Mhm.
is in families where there are needs that are not being met
Mhm.
because we're being reared by and we're in relationship with humans.
Mhm.
So even as children with parents who are great and amazing, there
Right.
were needs that were not met.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the premise there, understanding that no matter what happens in our
Right.
lives and how amazing things appear, it's important for us to ask ourselves, what is it that I needed that I didn't receive?
Okay.
Hmm.
Because when we do that,
Mhm.
we then acknowledge our own humanity.
Right.
We also acknowledge that our needs are valid.
Mhm.
And so when you ask, why is it that we don't reach out for help?
Right.
Part of it is because if our needs were not met in our childhood,
Mhm.
in order to cope with that, many of us develop a false idea or a false self who says, I don't need any help. It's easier to say
Mhm.
I don't need any help than to say I desperately needed help and the people who were there to protect and love me did
Didn't.
not show up for me.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so we develop this needless, wantless mentality that, oh, do you need help with that? No, I got it. I got it. What? No, I'm good.
Right.
Hear Black women specifically say, I don't need no man. I just need God. That's it.
Right.
Okay. Why don't you? I mean, okay, that if
Right.
you don't need anyone, then why were you placed in the world uh, and wired for connection with other humans? And
Mhm.
why were you placed in a community called the world if you don't need anybody else but God? You should have
Right.
been translated the moment you were conceived because you don't need anybody.
Right.
So
Exactly.
we have to be really careful about the reasons why,
Mhm.
going under the surface and asking ourselves, why do I have that attitude that I don't need
Right.
anybody?
Right.
Because it's just not true. And it
Mhm.
is a betrayal of our own experience, our own human experience, and our own, it's a betrayal of really who we are at our core. And
Right.
that
And
is,
yeah. And I think it also it goes down to forgiveness, right? Because in those instances, usually someone has asked for help at some point and didn't get it, right? For whatever the reason is. And so in that they develop a pattern that says, if I ask for help, I won't get it. And therefore, I'll be disappointed because I won't get any help. And it'll make me feel worse to ask for help than to actually, ask for it. And maybe I'll get it, right? They're thinking about the times that they didn't. And so, I would assume that there is an aspect of forgiveness that is necessary, that you're willing and able to forgive the human who may have let you down at some point in time when you ask for help and allow someone to help you in the future.
that
You
has,
no, after you, Queen.
okay, I was just going to ask this, and maybe Dr. White knows this because
Mhm.
of his background, but I have this theory, and I could be completely wrong, but this is anecdotal research that I've done in my own practice over 22 and a half years.
Okay.
People who struggle with forgiveness,
Mhm.
struggling to forgive,
Right.
Mm.
there are certain medical challenges that this group of people develop over time. And it seems to be directly related to something that they never let go of.
Mm.
Anger, unforgiveness. I've
Mhm.
seen heart problems, um, fibromyalgia, things that are like, okay, I've had people come into my office and
Mhm.
say to me, it wasn't until I forgave my grandfather for maybe sexually abusing me until I forgave him that
Right.
I didn't I didn't have these manifestations of chronic fatigue syndrome. I
Right.
can't get out of bed. My muscles don't
Mm.
work right. My body doesn't work right. My immune system is jacked up. Maybe Dr. White, you can speak to
Sure.
that.
Sure. First of all, there's a book, Helping Clients Forgive, that
Mm.
underscores the critical role of forgiving in mental health, but health in general. I was a biochemist in undergrad, And one of the most fascinating things is seeing how thoughts impact your biochemistry, how your thoughts are the essence of a biochemical reaction.
Okay.
And a lot of times we almost want to think that a thought is just ethereal, or it's just in the ether, or it's just there and it's disconnected from your body, when in fact, if you just saw a little mouse run across your floor or something like that, you're talking about increased heart rate and blood pressure and, a very, very physiological response. Well, that was a
Right.
mouse. Imagine a chronic big mouse, something that's chronic, that's in your space constantly, and that's having, a chronic elevated level of cortisol, for example. Like, these things have a physiological consequence, and contrast that with if you were to go through the process of coming to like a psychotherapeutic resolution of what was done was wrong.
Right.
In fact, it should not have been done to me. And there's no question that person was wrong in that they did it. And you go through the exercise of, uncovering every way in which it was wrong and what it took from you. And then you come to that space where it's, I'm going to leave that there. You know what? I'm going to evolve past that. That's work. But the implications are huge on your very physiology, because these thoughts have a physiological manifestation.
Right.
That of course can be very harmful when you don't take the time to actually resolve them.
Yes.
There's just briefly, I want to share a resource with our audience tonight. There's a book entitled The Body Keeps the Score. It's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Vanderkolk. Van der Kolk they're all separate words, Van der Kolk.
Okay.
Just so that in case anyone is looking it up on Amazon or whatever, but the book is, it was a groundbreaking book several years ago that Dr. van der Kolk wrote, and it really just talks about how trauma registers in the body first. And so because it registers in the body first, his research and his understanding of trauma really turned the psychological world on its head, neuroscience specifically, because he made some connections there to help people understand what's happening when they experience trauma. And so that book is excellent in learning how your body is impacted by the things that happen to you outside of your body and in your relationships.
But by the way, there's a whole discipline called psychoneuroimmunology that is, providing groundbreaking information about the interplay of psychology and immunology and psychoneuroimmunology. Yeah. Anyway, of the endocrine plus. Anyway, it's a long discussion, but the bottom. Go ahead.
No, please.
Thank you for that. Sorry. Thank you for that, because that sort of answers my question from earlier, how I'm seeing these patients and they're like, yeah, my fibromyalgia really isn't, but they've been working with me for maybe a year or so and working through releasing a lot of the unforgiveness, a lot of the anger, a lot of the just being stuck in that space and not being able to move forward, that their physical symptoms, the immunology, that piece is some of that, those issues are being resolved.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So for the last 10 minutes or so, I want you guys both to just talk about what should we do when we feel we are reaching our breaking point.
You want to go first, Queen?
Sure. You want me to do our takeaway tips today or just
Not yet. We want to talk about, if people are reaching their breaking point, what's your advice for that?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is being connected to your body, understanding what's going on in your body, because you won't know that you're at your breaking point unless you're in tune with, connected with your body and asking yourself, what is it that I'm feeling in my body? Because your body registers emotional pain first, trauma
Okay.
first. It registers there. When you're very much connected to that, then if you're getting to the breaking point or approaching the breaking point, then you'll be aware of it.
Okay.
Many women,
Mhm.
we're trained to just keep going.
Push through it.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And that's where we find women being admitted to behavioral health care hospitals, admitted to residential locked facilities, or, you know, relatively long-term facilities, 45-day facilities, because they got to a place where they completely broke down. And
Mhm.
when they come in, they'll say, I had no warning.
Right.
There was no, I don't know what happened. One day I
Snapped.
didn't realize it was so bad.
Right.
Mhm. And when we go back and explore that with them, then they're able to track and trace based on what was happening in their body, what was happening in their relationships, what was happening at work,
Mm.
different places, that there's then that reconnection to self.
Mm.
So what do we do if we're reaching our breaking point? In order to avoid reaching your breaking point, you want to be aware of what's going on. But if you have reached your breaking point
Mm.
and you have passed that threshold of crisis, you've crossed over the threshold into crisis, then you're to seek help. That means not just call a therapist, because for
Right.
you, breaking point could mean anything. For Chesley Chris, her breaking point was the day that she planned what she would do on that day when she went from the 69th floor to the 29th floor. That likely was not something that happened spontaneously.
Mm.
One of the things, and I think, Danette, you and I have talked about this in the past, one of the things about suicide, people who are completing suicide, one of the pieces of that, and I've been learning a lot more about it because there's a lot more research about it now.
Mm-hmm.
There was a doctor, and I'll have to find his name, but I was at a medical conference and they were talking about suicide. And the doctor was saying he specifically studies suicide. And he was saying so many people believe that suicide is directly related to depression. When you ask any person in the world, well, why do people commit suicide? Because they're depressed. But it's not depression. The reason why people complete is because of a pervasive sense of hopelessness that they cannot surpass. It is not depression. In fact, many people who have serious or severe depression do not have the motivation to complete a plan or to complete the suicide. They can't even get out of bed. So when people talk about suicide, it's important that we're educating the public about what it really is, what it means, what leads a person down that path. And while it's different for everyone, foundationally, the issue is chronic and pervasive hopelessness, not depression.
Can I chime in there? So I think what you're saying is not only depression, that can be connected to, not only, because of course there's some depressed people. So with suicide, we're talking about 47 to 48,000 Americans who complete suicide annually. Do you know that it's roughly about 1.4 million attempts, as far as suicide? The other thing that I think you're speaking to is roughly about 54% of suiciders do not have a known psychiatric diagnosis. So again, kind of speaking to what you're saying, and then there being two elements when you see acute suicide, one of them being hopelessness, and then the other being desperation. Desperation. Like when you bring those two things together, a lot of times you'll see that that's when people become actively suicidal. So I hope you caught Christina's advice in terms of self-awareness. So often when when a patient's in front of me, just like you were saying, and they start to catch all of the pressure they were under, spiritually, and from a relationship standpoint, and from the obligations of work, and maybe having a physical malady on top of that, when all of those things come together, the overwhelming is so clear that this is not a sign of weakness that you succumbed. Like, look how much it took, so you don't have to feel like you were weak. It's amazing you withstood this for this long. And so the key is that you're becoming aware that, look at all this stuff that's on me. Queens, this is not a sign of weakness. Yes, you are strong, but let me let you know, everyone has a melting point. In fact, it's one of the ways that in biochemistry we would identify a compound, because everything has a melting point. So don't wait for yours.
Right.
Keep yourself in that space of health by giving serious priority to having your support systems, with the full understanding that you can be in some very toxic settings because of the blind spots that are around these issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And let's move really quickly through your tips, Christina.
Sure. So just some takeaways from today in terms of how we can take off the cape. Today's conversation was about the Black Superwoman syndrome, and we've been wearing our cape for centuries now. And so as we move into the actual takeaway tips, I just want to share with you guys that it's so important that, number one, we stay in tune with our feelings and that we show ourselves compassion. One of the things that's important as we're working on developing a great sense of well-being is that we show ourselves compassion. And what does showing ourselves compassion do for us? It releases our guilt. It releases our shame. It gives us an opportunity to see ourselves as human and to not judge ourselves. And then secondly, thank you. Secondly, we need to take our time to identify our feelings and what's happening in our bodies. I've talked about this for the duration of today's conversation, how important it is for us to be connected to what's going on in our body, not just what we're thinking and feeling, but what we're experiencing in our body, because that gives the clue to what's happening. Why is it that I'm feeling flushed every time somebody says these words to me? Well, where did that come from? Now let's explore that. Now, how can I deal with it moving forward? Talking about your personal struggle with safe people. That's a whole other conversation about how to identify safe people. But the reason why we talk about our struggles with safe people is not because they have the answers, because we're not looking to someone else for the answers, because the answers are inside of us. But the reason why we share our struggle with safe people is so that we can reduce our shame and develop shame resilience. Dr. Brene Brown established the shame resilience model. And I've been following her probably since way before her very first book, because she's a social worker like I am. So she was speaking at conferences before she became huge on TEDx. But it's important that we do that. It's important that we talk about our struggles with safe people, not expecting them to give us solutions to our problems, but so that we can release the shame and move forward with our lives.
Absolutely.
And then reaching out for help, find a therapist, a coach. If you're in a 12-step or recovery program, get yourself a sponsor, a mentor. Find supportive places to place yourself in so that you can create and nurture an environment that serves your well-being. There are enough hostile environments in our lives now, whether it be work or out in the communities where we live, or even in our own households. There may be challenges there. But if we can develop and create an environment for ourselves that serves us, then we can certainly take off the cape that we've been wearing for way too long. And then finally, there are three other ones that I want to briefly go through as well, that will help us. And that is, stop rescuing others to validate your worth. Start asking yourselves the question, why am I helping this person? Why do I feel a need to rescue this person? Why am I feeling anxious as this person is telling me about their problem?
Mhm.
And then I don't feel as anxious when I rescue them. That's something to think about. Why did my anxiety go down because I rescued them? And why is it going up as I'm listening to what they're going through? Give yourself time to decide if yes is the right answer for you.
Mhm.
Yes is not always the right answer. And you don't deserve anybody an immediate answer at any point.
Right.
It's an emergency,
Mhm.
right? So just remember that. Give yourself the time. You are not obligated to meet everyone's expectations when they want them met or when you perceive they need them met.
Absolutely. And Dr.
And then
White, I'm sorry.
okay.
Oh no, Queen. I think those last three were better than the other ones. I'm so glad you did them. So that was fire.
Yes.
You can go to so for my suggestions, you can go to blacktherapy.com. Okay, blacktherapy.com, where I have a Killing Suicide ebook. And what I outline in the ebook is 7 vital areas of your life. I just really want to champion what Christina is saying about self-awareness. And so in those 7 vital areas, I have a discussion so that you can begin empowering yourself with creating value in those 7 areas. But our goal is that you don't get to the point of overwhelm.
Absolutely.
That's the whole point. So it's putting systems in place so you don't get there, you know?
Yes.
And obviously I echo her sentiments in terms of when in doubt, get yourself help, get yourself some help. Good news. So I run a psychiatric service, and we don't keep you in the hospital as long as people think. Back in the day, you'd go to a psychiatric hospital and they would build a cottage for you. You were going to be there for a year, you know? Gone are the days. You know, I'll look at the patient and be like, how long am I going to be here, doctor? I was like, well, we're building a cottage for you right outside, you know? And it's like, no, that doesn't happen anymore. This is a matter of days, and then they get you to the outpatient setting where the care actually continues.
Right.
But so get the help you need is what I'm saying. Get that help that you need. Don't be afraid to get that help. And I want you to just, you know, echo to yourself, I have value. I have value. It's so critical that you do that. So again, it's blacktherapy.com. Download your free ebook.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And so as we are looking to close, if you want more, we're going to continue the conversation on Clubhouse. And on Clubhouse at 5:30, or if you're in Pacific Standard Time, and that'll be, I guess, 8:30 Eastern. And so the name of the room is the High Performance Woman, and the topic is the high cost of being a Black Superwoman. And then in addition to that, next month we will cover you know, our second heart-to-heart conversation will be the high cost of being a Black Superman. So we thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to being there to support you. As always, if you know you or someone you know is in crisis, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and their information is listed here. You can follow us on Healthy Heart Nation, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening.